Greetings, dear reader. I am Erik Eldritch, and today we'll be reading my book, Don't Worry, I Won't Be Long, The Tale of Greypelt and the Thieves of Reggio. Grazia yawned to get it out of her system before carefully removing the iron kettle from the fire with some long metal tongs. She poured a serving of boiling water into a waiting wooden mug and set the kettle down near the hearth. The tired spy held the mug close to let the steam wash up into her face, rejuvenating her before the inevitable briefing with the master of the guild. From her pockets, the career criminal produced a bergamot that she had pilfered from an unwary street stall earlier in the morning, and her own knife to slice it with. She sliced the fruit in half, holding it up to her nose to enjoy the aroma before squeezing the juice from one side into her drink. Like a connoisseur, she blew over the mug to cool its contents and waited for the perfect temperature to arrive before tasting her potion. The warm sensation and pleasing aroma were almost enough to carry the weary chief of information away from all her worldly troubles. But her keen Panati hearing identified the clamorous approach of the guild's master. "Grazia," Drudo called as he barged into the room with Ferrante at his heels. "What news do you have?" The spy master eyed her boss resentfully without turning her face away from its pleasant steam bath. Trudeau had presumably gotten a full night's sleep, or at least he'd had the opportunity to do so if his worrying hadn't kept him awake. Grazia, on the other hand, had spent the night and early morning trotting through the rain trying to get in touch with anybody in her network who might have laid eyes on the conspicuous stranger that she was tracking. It was now past noon, and though it was normal enough for the Chief of Information to do such work at strange hours, practice was no substitute for sleep. "Can it wait a moment?" she asked wearily. The Master of the Guild and his Chief of Information could often be adversarial in their interactions, but despite his short temper, Drudo respected his associates. Without a word, the gigantic man sat down across from his little Panati spy and patiently loomed over her as she completed her gastronomic ritual. Ferrante coolly leaned against the wall next to the entryway, never one to express his eagerness. At last, Grazia took a long, slow sip of the bergamot tisane. It seemed to transform her, as though she were imbibing the stuff of life itself. "It's quite the mystery, to be honest," Grazia finally explained. "The leading theory among the witnesses is that our visitor was an agent of Orcus, sent to whisk our Andronikos off to hell for some crime he did before coming to Reggio. You and I don't believe such wild tales about our fellow sentient beings, but from all I've heard, I'm starting to wonder if it might be true." The spy punctuated the thought with another long sip of her beverage. "But if she has come from hell, at least she had the decency to use the road. The night watch in the third tower saw her and her creature enter the town around sunset and leave during the dead of night. The beast made quite an impression on them. Some sort of massive reptilian that looked like it clawed its way out of the primordial ether, though I would wager it actually crawled out of an Egyptian beastmaster's ranch. The guards were afraid to allow it into the city, but the she-wolf had it completely under her control, and promised them she wouldn't be long in the city anyways. They were afraid that if they denied her, she'd cause trouble. After what happened in the tavern, I think they made the smart decision. A few hours later, they saw the cynocephalus and her creature leave the city. The guards didn't notice a Panati with her when she left, but he might have been stuffed into her supply wagon. A few of the other taverns in town mentioned a mysterious traveler stopping by last night. Seems that she hopped from place to place until someone gave her the tip that led her to Andronikos. As to your theory," Grazia continued after another sublime sip, "I think I can at least confirm that the carnelian swan is missing." "It's possible that Andronikos knew about it and lied that he had stolen it himself," Drudo insisted. "It is a possibility," his spy admitted, "but it would seem that he knew it was missing before its owners did, and the gardener has seen a Panati hanging around the place. So it is most likely that Andronikos did indeed steal the swan, and then contacted you before anyone else." Trudeau rested on his elbows and reassessed his impression of the Panati thief while Grazia returned to her beverage. "What about a rival guild from Byzantium?" Ferrante asked from the sidelines. Grazia satisfied her thirst before answering. "I see no evidence for it. I can't rule out a secret conspiracy, but I see no unexplained events that I could attribute to one. Kidnapping Andronikos would be their first and only action. Everyone who laid eyes on this cynocephalus says that she was outfitted for travel. She rolled into Reggio, snapped up our thief, and rolled right back out. I doubt she knew anything about the carnelian swan, and from what I've heard, it would be rare for a cynocephalus to even care. The timing is just an unhappy coincidence, or else Laverna thought he hadn't earned his prize. The trio sat in silence for a few minutes while the men thought it over and the woman finished her drink. "Just dragged our boy right off to hell," Grazia mumbled from behind her mug. "Wait!" Trudeau suddenly leapt from his seat. "If that devil dog is dragging him off to hell or to Byzantium, she's dragging off the carnelian swan, too. We have to follow after them or we lose the gem." "I already sent Therion and Hippolyta to go down the road she left by," Grazia explained calmly, "with orders only to observe, not to engage. If she's as strong as they say, we don't want our precious centaurs getting hurt. I'm sure our horses can catch up to a dragon with a wagon once they come back with a sighting." Trudeau wanted to object to the order of inaction, but he had to admit that she was probably right. However valuable the carnelian swan might prove to be, the life of a loyal centaur was more, and he would have been more than furious if Grazia had sent them to their deaths. The giant sat back down. "Then we can only wait for their return," the master mused. "As that concludes my debriefing and my beverage," Grazia announced, "I'd quite like to pay my dues to Somnus now." Trudeau was so caught up in his own thoughts that he hardly noticed, so Ferrante gave his permission, and stopped leaning on the doorway to let her pass. The cool-headed captain poured himself a glass of boiled water left over from Grazia's cauldron. Ferrante absorbed the guildmaster while he waited for the drink to cool. He knew his boss would not retain his composure for long, and indeed, Trudeau lasted only a few minutes at the bench before he gave in to pacing across the room. The dutiful deputy wondered what he could say to calm the giant's nerves. The wrong topic could easily only wind him up more. "Waiting is sometimes the hardest part of thievery, isn't it?" Ferrante finally spoke. Trudeau looked surprised, as though he had forgotten that his friend was still in the room. Seeing his boss's face unsnarl at his comment, Ferrante deduced that Trudeau would welcome the distraction from his runaway thoughts and continued. "When we ourselves are geared up and ready to go, but the world is unprepared for us. It's not an easy feeling." "It's more than that, my friend," Trudeau sighed. "I created this guild because I wanted power over things. It's so frustrating when you know you could break a noble's neck with your bare hands, but still you must curtsy meekly to them when they pass in the streets. The Thief Guild was a way to make our own nobility, to get back at them in the shadows when we can't act in the daylight. But now, instead of worrying about myself, I worry about my thieves. Seems my consternation over every one of them is 10 times what it would be if it were me in their place, even though half of them or more would double-cross me in a heartbeat if they thought they could get away with it." The giant guildmaster sat down once again on the bench and looked his friend in the eyes. "I created this guild because I wanted to have power," the man repeated. "But the fact of it is, Ferrante, there is no power to be had. I have the greatest spy and the fastest hooves in all of Reggio looking for our little Andronikos, and I can't even say if he has betrayed me or been loyal." "Not only that," Ferrante answered. "We have never had our hands on the carnelian swan, and yet we feel that it is slipping from our grasps." "You are right!" Trudeau chuckled at the irony and slammed his fist on the table to release his tension. "Who are we to feel loss over such a thing? It would not belong to us even if we had it." The giant guffawed and slapped his other hand upon the table, more softly this time. "And yet we do, Ferrante. Of course we do. Because every gem and bauble in Reggio is ours for the taking, as soon as the opportunity presents itself." "All we must do is wait," Ferrante chimed in. Trudeau laughed delightedly. He had been fished out of his whirlpool of mental misery by his friend, and now looked upon his own troubles from afar, like the audience of a play. "Come," said Ferrante. "If we cannot pass the time productively, let us at least pass it in enjoyment." The second-in-command produced a deck of cards, and the duo distracted themselves adequately with a few games. Trudeau could never keep his mind completely off his work, so the two chatted about business while they played. Which of their thieves showed the most promise? What target seemed vulnerable? The prices of contraband, and so on. The guildmaster was able to keep his worries from spiraling out of control, for if he lost his focus on the game, he would be snapped back by the penalties of poor play. Before too long, one of the guild's thieves knocked on the door of the room. "Master Drudo, Therion and Hippolyta have just returned." Drudo leapt up, and the cards were instantly forgotten in favor of the greater game of thievery. Ferrante swept up the deck himself before following. Playing cards were quite rare and valuable in those days, so he didn't trust the guild's thieves to leave his precious deck alone. When the deputy caught up with the master, he was already debriefing the centaurs about their reconnaissance run. They were noticeably winded from their long trek, so their doting boss had them rest upon some floor cushions as they gave their accounts. Drudo sat across from his centaurs on a cushion of his own, almost equal in bulk to his half-horse cohorts, and Ferrante seated himself similarly when he arrived. "I'm sure I found someone," Therion, the male, was explaining, "hanging around the old Roman water shrine. Even I'm not keen to enter that ghost's nest, but I didn't have to. The rain from yesterday made plenty of mud, so there were signs of wagon wheels and unusual footprints all over the place. Some were like a big dog, which makes sense for a cynocephalus. The others must belong to her pet, some sort of land crocodile. Whatever that thing is, I'd hate to mitt it without my roncone. I didn't see any other tracks, so there's only the two of them, and if they've still got Andronikos, they carried him, which seems within their power." "I know the place you speak of," Ferrante responded. "It's only an hour's ride, if that." "Are you sure she's still there? They may have only stopped there for the night." "I thought so too," Therion answered. "So I circled the place and saw no sign that they had left. There were tracks in, but none out. Either the devil dog's still there, or that's where she passed through her portal to hell." "Don't you start with that," Drudo admonished. "Think of all the false rumors people spread about you and I." "Well," the centaur chuckled, "not all of them are false, after all." "Still, it could be that the cynocephalus means to travel at night," Ferrante suggested, back to business. "Wolves prefer to work at night. Maybe she does, too. Perhaps she means to trek further after sundown. We should form a party to ride out and intercept her right away." "If she's as strong as they say," Hippolyta, the female centaur, interjected. "I'd love to challenge her myself. We never get to test our skills in a fair fight." "If you're ever in a fair fight, it means I've failed you," Drudo answered. "No, you two have been searching the countryside since morning. I'm not willing to risk you getting injured against this unknown warrior and her creature. We have fresh brutes we can send to do this." "Let me lead the mission, my lord," Ferrante asked suddenly. "I'd rather not risk you, either," his master replied. "I felt as though I'm at fault for not meeting Andronikos at the appointed time," the usually cool-headed deputy admitted. "I'll don my armor and shield and take the men with me. Let me repair my mistake." Drudo looked at his subordinate a long time before responding. "Very well, but stay safe. You are important to this guild. Do not value anyone else above yourself." Ferrante bowed to signal his acknowledgement, and hastened to his quarters where his armor was kept. Before his thieving career, he had fought as a rodolero, a modern revival of the Roman legionary. There were a few knights in Reggio that could outclass him with full panoply and more combat practice, but outfitted with his army helmet, breastplate, and roundel shield, and his military training, he was more than a match for most swordsmen throughout Calabria. As he looked himself over in the mirror, the detached deputy hoped that it would give him enough of an advantage against the mysterious doghead. Ferrante alone had seen the aftermath of her fight in the tavern. He didn't want to fill the heads of his subordinates with needless worry, but he couldn't help but feel those worries himself. Meanwhile, Drudo rounded up a mob of his most brutish thugs and made sure they were equipped with sharp swords from the guild's arsenal. While these preparations were going on, the guildmaster commanded one of his more pious underlings to prepare the cup and wine for Laverna. When Ferrante finally appeared, fully armored, and the gang of swordsmen were equipped and assembled, they all followed Drudo to a small room in the hideout that served as their sanctuary to Laverna, goddess of thieves. As Drudo had commanded, a jug of sacramental wine in a silver cup with an engraving of their holy patron's likeness had been placed upon their wooden altar. A head without a body. It was said that Laverna appeared to plotting thieves in this bodiless form. After the deed was done, she would appear to those who failed as a headless body, but to those who completed their heist successfully, the shadowy goddess would appear in full. After a short prayer from the guild's makeshift priest, each of the swordsmen spoke their own affirmation of faith, took the jug of wine in their left hand, and poured a small portion into Laverna's cup. Drudo poured his own libation last, and said his own prayer, beseeching their goddess to protect his men on their mission, concluding the little ceremony. The truth was that the superstition-hating giant detested this charade, but as he looked upon the earnest eyes of his brutes, he smiled at the courageous transformation it brought about. The normally raucous thugs had been quiet and somber during the affair, and swiftly returned to their normal demeanor. With Ferrante in his armor and Laverna at their side, they were more than eager to slay this devil dog and her dragon, for failure was impossible. Back at the Roman ruins, Andronikos had passed his time in captivity silently. As a thief, it felt unnatural for him to shy away like this. A good criminal gathers information, and even ingratiates himself to his targets to lower their guards. But the little Panati could not bring himself to try his tricks against the alien Amazon that held him captive. He couldn't begin to fathom what words would motivate or deter the strange mind of the cynocephalus, or what she would see as friendly or hostile. Silence was safer. Andronikos looked over at his canine captor. The nocturnal creature had decided to spend the hot afternoon sleeping, and she was currently curled in a ball, nuzzled up to her massive reptilian companion. The wolf-woman was still as naked as the day she was born, though she had the sense to keep a pile of weapons close at hand. The Panati did not understand the Arabic commands that Greypelt issued to her dear Latifa, but he had gathered that the beast had been ordered to keep an eye on him, and probably to chase him if he moved. For the most part, the Ninki Nanka looked as though it were asleep as well, but whenever Andronikos tested the ropes that bound him, the creature would rouse itself and hiss menacingly. But even though thoughts of escape were natural to the condemned criminal, attempting to flee seemed more and more like a terrible idea. Supposing he managed to slip away while the devil dog dozed, Andronikos had little doubt that she or her infernal saurian were capable of tracking him by scent. He had been blind to the route that brought them there. If Laverna smiled upon him, the Panati might be able to bumble his way back to the road, but it would be a short time before his captors noticed he was missing and came sniffing after him. If he couldn't make it back into Reggio by nightfall, the Hound and her Hellion could see in the dark while he couldn't. Andronikos could sometimes navigate in the dark by echolocation, a sub-skill of his advanced Panati hearing, but that worked best in the close quarters of city streets or indoor environments, and it would involve making small noises that he was sure would give him away to the keen-eared cynocephalus. It occurred to the thief that until now he had never truly appreciated the natural ineptness of his human countrymen, and how much easier they made his way of life. Greypelt had scoffed at Andronikos for his thieving ways when they first met, and it now struck him that any thieves among the cynocephali were probably hunted down and brought to justice in the span of hours, thanks to their incredible senses. Andronikos reflected on how lucky he had been so far. It had been lucky that the ship he had stowed away on to escape Theodosia was only crewed by half-deaf humans and a single klabauterman who had taken pity on the young Panati refugee, and luckier that the craft had been bound for Reggio, where Drudo's thief guild had taken him in. The condemned criminal reflected on what a huge moral debt he owed to Drudo, and how he'd never be able to repay it. A distant sound shook the Panati from his dismal veil of regrets. The tread of hoofbeats was barreling towards the ruins. It was not a single horse, but several, more than he could count from hearing alone. Andronikos looked over at his captors. The Ninki Nanka had not reacted. The earless reptilian probably couldn't hear well enough to pick it up. The cynocephalus could have detected these new intruders, but she was still fast asleep. As the charge of horses continued, it became obvious that the group was making a beeline for the ruins. Andronikos was full of hope. The centaur traveler from that morning must have been Therion or Hippolyta. The horsemen now must be Drudo's thieves riding to the rescue. Before, he had been too afraid to call out for help, fearing that the devil dog would sink her fangs into his neck before he could finish a single word. But now a whole gang of thieves were upon her and would literally catch her with their pants down. Still, the little rogue had caution in his heart and uttered a secret bird call that the guild used to communicate their presence without alerting anyone else. As that uncanny cry echoed throughout the ruins, Andronikos heard the party of horsemen take their horses down to a trot and mumble to themselves in reaction. The lazing Latifa opened her eyes and glared at the Panati prisoner, but didn't seem to know what to make of the situation. After a few agonizing seconds, one of the riders repeated Andronikos' signal, confirming that they were indeed Drudo's thieves. Now the Saurian warden did recognize that something was amiss, and uttered one of its terrifying, low-toned hisses that sounded like the earth cracking open to let its hordes of demons escape. This roused the cynocephalus slightly, but she only creaked her lids open to confirm that her prisoner was still chained and then returned to her sleep. The Niki Nanka remained agitated and glared at the Panati, daring him to repeat his offense. In the surrounding forest, Andronikos could hear that the guildsmen were straying from their course. Either their human ears were insufficient to pinpoint their target by sound alone, or the path to the ruins was too winding to proceed directly. After a while of this, one of the thieves made a different bird call signal, which meant to the thieves, "Where are you?" Greypelt's ears turned towards the sound and her brow furrowed, but her eyes remained shut. She would realize her mistake at any moment, Andronikos thought. Better to lead the men here as quickly as possible. The Panati whistled his response, and this time Greypelt's ears flattened in rage as her groggy brain made sense of what was happening. Her eyes opened wide and she bolted upright. Latifa emulated her master's enthusiasm. The beast rushed over to where Andronikos was bound to the ancient pillar and slapped him soundly with her tail. The immobile prisoner could not put his arms up to guard or step back to avoid the blow, so it hit him hard in the diaphragm and left him sputtering and gasping for breath. If she had been so inclined, Latifa could have easily shattered his skull or broken every one of his ribs, but the creature had carefully calculated the attack to only punish, not destroy. While the beast doled out the retribution, the master rushed to her pile of weapons. Greypelt could hear that the noisy gang of hairless apes were almost upon her. She had time to grab a single weapon and chose a long, gray quarterstaff. The staff's reach would be a life-saving advantage, and its bluntness was no detriment in her capable hands. Furthermore, the weapon was a favorite of the cynocephali, who did little metalworking in their native lands, but it was rather uncommon in Italia, and thus unfamiliar to her present foes. Equipped as well as she could be, Greypelt barked new orders in Arabic. "Latifa, leave it," to rescind her previous command to watch over the prisoner, and "Defend," to alert the creature that they were about to face combat. Thank you for joining me, dear reader. If you'd like to help me out, you can press the like button. Let me know what's on your mind in the comments. And you can buy my books on Amazon. Link in the description. And with any luck, we'll all meet again.